Combinations of Consciousness and Mental Factors. Today is March 14, 1998. We will be discussing combinations of Cetasika and Citta. We have two methods we can use, the Sampayoga method and the Sangaha method. It's very interesting but a little hard to understand at times. Sampayoga method. The Sampayoga method deals with what mental factors arise in what types of consciousness. We studied the 52 mental factors and the 89 types of consciousness. Here, we'll be talking about what mental factors arise in what types of consciousness. We will study this one by one. All 52 of these mental factors and all 89 types of consciousness are akin to material things we use to construct a building. We need these materials. Here, if you can't remember the materials, then it's very hard to move forward. Now, we'll combine Cetasika and Citta. We'll start with Sabachittasatdharana. 1 to 7, Sabachittasatdharana. You already know what this means, right? It refers to the 7 universal mental factors. These 7 mental factors are common to every type of consciousness. Whatever consciousness arises, these universal mental factors will always arise with it. So, these 7 are very easy to remember. When eye consciousness arises, you see me, or when you hear me, ear consciousness. At that moment the Sabachittasatdharana, 7 universal mental factors, arise. Every type of consciousness has these 7 mental factors. That's why we call them universal mental factors. No matter what type of consciousness arises, these Sabachittasatdharana always arise. That's clear, right? 8. Vitakka. We have the second group, right? We call them the 6 occasional mental factors. Among these 6 occasional mental Fctors, Vitakka, initial application, arises in 55 types of consciousness. What are they? I'll explain the method that makes it easy to remember. How many Kamavikara Citta do we have? 54. Excluding the 10 types that comprise Dvipankaviññāna, twice fivefold consciousness, or sense impression consciousness, i.e., the 2 types of eye consciousness, the 2 types of ear consciousness, the 2 types of nose consciousness, the 2 types of tongue consciousness, and the 2 types of body consciousness. That leaves 44 types of Kamavikara Citta. Then, we have Vitakka in the first jhana of Rupavikara Citta, where we see 1 in wholesome consciousness, 1 in resultant consciousness, and 1 in functional consciousness. And we also have Vitakka in the first jhana among the 4 Magga and 4 Phala. That's a total of 11 Vitakka in first jhana consciousness. So, 44 plus 11 is 55. Vitakka arises in these 55 types of consciousness. 9. Vikara. This one, sustained application, is easy. It is found in the same 55 types of consciousness as Vitakka, plus we find it in the 11 types of second jhana consciousness. Altogether, that's 66 types of consciousness. 10. Adhimokkha. This is decision. In other words, with Adhimokkha, you make a decision. This mental factor arises in 78 types of consciousness. Vicikiccha cannot make a decision, right? It is doubt. So, excluding Vicikiccha and the 10 Dvipankaviññāna, that leaves 78 types of consciousness in which Adhimokkha arises. 11. Viriya. This is effort. It arises in 73 types of consciousness. What are they? We exclude Dvipankaviññāna, right? That brings us down to 79 types of consciousness. We can also exclude the 2 types of Sampadicchana, receiving consciousness, the 3 types of Santirana, investigating consciousness, and Panyukadvaravajana, 5 sense-door adverting consciousness. That takes us to 73 types of consciousness. There are 18 types of Ahatukka, rootless, consciousness, right? Viriya arises in only 2 of them, Manadvaravajana, or mind-door adverting consciousness, and also Hasatuppada, or smile-producing consciousness. So, we deduct those 16 types of rootless consciousness without Viriya and end up with the 73 total types of consciousness. We can also compute it this way. Viriya arises in the 12 types of unwholesome consciousness, in those 2 types of Ahatukka, and in the 59 types of beautiful consciousness. So, 59 plus 14 is 73 types of consciousness. 12. Piti. This is joy or rapture. It arises in 51 types of consciousness. This is very easy. Think about Somanassa. Piti, or rapture, has the same nature as Somanassa. As such, it cannot associate with displeasurable feeling or indifferent feeling. It can only associate with Somanassa. So let's look at Somanassa. In unwholesome consciousness, there are 4 types with Somanassa. Piti arises with these 4 types of consciousness. With rootless consciousness, there are 2 types, investigating consciousness accompanied by pleasurable feeling, and smile-producing consciousness. There are also 12 types in beautiful sense sphere consciousness. That's a total of 18 types of consciousness. Then, think about the 5 factors of the first jhana. One of them is piti. The second jhana also has piti, as does the third. What about the fourth jhana? No piti. Altogether, piti is associated with 11 types of first jhana consciousness, 11 types of second jhana consciousness, and 11 types of third jhana consciousness. In all, that's 33 types of jhana consciousness. So, 18 plus 33 is 51 types of consciousness with piti. 13. Chanda. This is desire. It arises in 69 types of consciousness. What are they? We start by excluding moha. Why moha? Because when there's delusion, there's no desire. So, excluding the 2 moha mula sata and all 18 types of ahatuka, that's 20 types of consciousness. Chanda can arise in the remaining 69 types of consciousness. Someone once asked me if there is desire in a non-returner. The answer is yes. For example, a non-returner still has the wholesome desire to gain the final stage of enlightenment or gain phala. Chanda can arise with either wholesome or unwholesome consciousness. It depends on the nature of the desire. If you have the desire to steal, this is unwholesome consciousness. It is associated with lobha. But if you have the desire to sit in meditation, this is wholesome consciousness. Thus far, we've talked about anyasamana, which includes the 7 sabachitasadharana and the 6 occasional mental factors. These 13 mental factors can be called anyasamana, or miscellaneous mental factors. Among them, the 7 universal mental factors are linked with every type of consciousness, and the 6 occasional mental factors are linked accordingly. Now, we go to the 14 unwholesome mental factors. 14 to 17, Sabba Akusala Sadharana. These are the 4 universal unwholesome mental factors. Whatever unwholesome consciousness arises, these 4 mental factors, moha, or delusion, ignorance, ahirika, shamelessness, anatapa, fearlessness, and uddhacca, restlessness, arise all the time. When we talk about unwholesome consciousness, we don't have to look at the 25 beautiful mental factors at all. Instead, we can simply look at the 13 miscellaneous mental factors and the 14 unwholesome mental factors. The 14 unwholesome mental factors arise only in the 12 types of unwholesome consciousness. We don't have to look any further. That's what makes these easy to remember. So, whatever type of unwholesome consciousness arises, moha, ahirika, anatapa and uddhacca arise with it all the time. 18. Lobha. This is attachment, right? It arises in only 8 types of consciousness. They are the 8 types of lobha mula sata, or unwholesome consciousness rooted in attachment. Lobha arises in only those 8. 19. Ditthi. This is misbelief, wrong view, or false view. It is found only in ditthagata sampayuta, or unwholesome consciousness accompanied by wrong view. How many of these are there? Only 4. So, this mental factor is only found in these 4 types of consciousness. When we gain the first stage of enlightenment and become a stream enterer, we don't have these 4 types of consciousness anymore. We no longer have wrong view, as it's been completely eradicated. 20. Mana. This is conceit. It is found only in ditthagata vipayuta. Among the 8 types of lobha mula sata, we have 4 that are ditthagata sampayuta and 4 that are ditthagata vipayuta, right? So, mana arises only in unwholesome consciousness not associated with wrong view. It is not associated with wrong view. Mana and ditthi cannot arise together. Why? The commentaries say that mana and ditthi are like 2 king lions. Because the king lions have the same strength, they cannot share a den. One country cannot have 2 presidents, right? Ditthi says, this is mine. It is wrong view. And mana says, I'm the best. The 2 cannot arise together. That's why they have to separate. 21. Dosa, hatred. 22. Isa, jealousy. 23. Makariya, avarice. 24. Kukuka, remorse or regret. These 4 kinds of mental factors arise only in dosa mula sata, or unwholesome consciousness accompanied by ill will. When you hate someone or get mad at someone, in that moment your mind is dosa. If you are depressed or have anxiety, it's the same. When you're jealous, dosa arises in that moment. When you feel stingy, maybe you don't want anyone to bother you, dosa arises in that moment. And when you think about the bad things you've done or regret the good things you have not done and feel sorrow, in that moment dosa arises. So, hatred, jealousy, avarice, remorse, regret, or sorrow, is dosa mula sata. When you feel any of these, dosa sata arises. 25. Thena 26, Mitta. These are sloth and torpor. They arise in unwholesome consciousness prompted, or sasankarika. With sloth and torpor, you don't want to do anything, you require inducement. Thena Mitta is sickness of the mind. 27, Visakicha. This means doubt. The mental factor of doubt is found where? It is found in Visakicha Moha Mula Sata, or unwholesome consciousness accompanied by doubt. This mental factor arises only in Visakicha consciousness. So, from Moha to Visakicha there are altogether 14 mental factors, right? These 14 mental factors are linked only with unwholesome consciousness. Now, we go to beautiful mental factors. 28 to 46. Sobhana Sadharana. There are 19 of these beautiful universal mental factors. They arise in beautiful consciousness only. How many types of beautiful consciousness are there? 59. To make it easy to remember, the 19 beautiful universal mental factors arise in the 59 types of beautiful consciousness. They do not arise in unwholesome consciousness or rootless consciousness. 47 to 49, Virati. What is this? Abstinence. It includes these three mental factors, Samavaka, Samakamanta, and Sama-ajiva. These three mental factors arise in 16 types of consciousness, including the 8 types of Kamavikara wholesome consciousness, and briefly, the 4 types of path consciousness and the 4 types of fruit consciousness. So, 8 plus 8 is 16 types of consciousness. They arise in only these 16 types of consciousness. Broadly, you can also say these 3 mental factors are found in the 8 types of Kamavikara wholesome consciousness and the 40 types of supramundane consciousness. So, you can say Virati arises in either 16 or 48 types of consciousness. Both are correct. 50 to 51, Apamanya. These are the 2 illimitable mental factors, Karuna, compassion, and Mudita, appreciative or sympathetic joy. They arise in 28 types of consciousness. What are they? To start, they are the 8 types of Kamavikara wholesome consciousness and the 8 types of Kamavikara functional consciousness. That's 16 types of consciousness. Buddhas and arahants have compassion and sympathetic joy too. That's why these 2 mental factors can arise in functional consciousness. In the same way that we may see someone suffering and have compassion, fully enlightened beings can experience compassion. They can also have appreciation, perhaps in the attainment of enlightenment in another, and say, Sadhu. 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 What about the remaining 12 types of consciousness? For Lokya Sata, mundane consciousness, the object is a person who is suffering, for Karuna, or successful, for Mudita. See that? But Lokatra Sata, supramundane consciousness, observes Nibbana only. So these 2 mental factors cannot arise in supramundane consciousness. Now, let's look at Rupavikara Sata, where these 2 mental factors can arise for the first jhana, Kusala, Vipaka, and Kiriya, the second jhana, Kusala, Vipaka, and Kiriya, the third jhana, Kusala, Vipaka, and Kiriya, and the fourth jhana, Kusala, Vipaka, and Kiriya. That's a total of 12 types of consciousness. So, 16 plus 12 is 28 types of consciousness in which these 2 mental factors can arise. Why don't we see these mental factors with consciousness associated with the 5th jhana? Because they have upekkha, or equanimity. They're not interested in what's happening to others. If there's suffering or success, they let it go. This is because they have equanimity. In contrast, these 2 mental factors can arise in the 1st through 4th jhanas because there is somanasa, not upekkha. Why don't these 2 mental factors arise in Kamavikara resultant consciousness? Apamanya arising in Kamavikara wholesome consciousness depend on the object. Karuna takes the wish for others to overcome their suffering as its object, while Mudita takes other people's success, prosperity and well-being as its object. These are concepts, panyati. But resultant consciousness is itself resultant, it's not wholesome. That's why among Kamavikara Sata, for all people, except arahants, these 2 mental factors exist only in wholesome consciousness. So, sublime consciousness consists of the 15 types of Rupavikara Sata and the 12 types of Arupavikara Sata. We call this sublime consciousness. Excluding the 15 types associated with the 5th jhana, there are 12 types of sublime consciousness. Add this to the 8 types of Kamavikara wholesome consciousness and the 8 types of Kamavikara functional consciousness and you get 28 types of consciousness. 52. Panyendriya. This is wisdom. It arises in 47 types of consciousness. What are they? Panya cannot arise in unwholesome consciousness, rootless consciousness, or consciousness without knowledge. It arises where there is jnana sampayuta. We have 4 jnana sampayutta each amongst sense sphere beautiful, resultant and functional consciousness. That's 12 types of consciousness accompanied by wisdom. As far as sublime consciousness, although we don't call it jnana sampayutta, you can't gain jhana without knowledge. As such, wisdom is found within the 27 types of sublime consciousness, as well as the 8 types of supramundane consciousness. That totals 35 types of consciousness. So, 35 plus 12 is 47 types of consciousness accompanied by knowledge, wisdom. Unfixed adjuncts. Thus far, we've been talking about the various types of consciousness in which the mental factors can or will arise. We've been discussing the Sampayoga method. For the Sampayoga method, there are 11 Aniyata yogi cetasika. Aniyata means unfixed, or not always. The term Aniyata yogi cetasika refers to 11 unfixed adjuncts. They arise separately and occasionally. Let's look at the first 3. Isa-e, Makarya-e, Kukuka. Where do these 3 mental factors arise? They arise in dosa mula sata, right? When they arise with this sata, they arise separately, not together, not at the same time. If Isa, jealousy, for example, arises in dosa mula sata, then Makarya and Kukuka cannot arise. Why? Because they have a different object. Isa feels jealous, the object is outside. On the other hand, Makarya, stinginess, is concerned with one's own property, the object is oneself. Similarly, Kukuka, remorse, is concerned with oneself. Because the objects differ, these mental factors cannot arise together. When you feel remorse or regret, at that moment you cannot also feel jealousy. That's why when these 3 mental factors arise, although they arise as dosa mula sata, they arise separately. These mental factors also arise occasionally. When dosa mula sata arises, jealousy, avarice or remorse don't always also arise, only sometimes. For example, when you feel jealous, you might not feel angry. In the same way, when you feel angry, it's not necessarily about stinginess. What happens is this. When you feel jealousy, Isa arises. When you feel stinginess, Makarya arises. And when you feel remorse, Kukuka arises. That's the nature of mind and mental factors. These mental factors do not occur simultaneously, rather, they arise at one particular moment. Let's look at the next 3, Virati. IV, Samavaka V, Samakamanta V, Sama-ajiva. Where do these 3 mental factors arise? They arise in the 8 types of Kamavakara wholesome consciousness and the 8 types of supramundane consciousness. In the former, they arise separately and occasionally. Let's understand why. When abstaining from evil speech, what mental factor arises? Only Samavaka, Samakamanta and Sama-ajiva cannot arise. In the same way, when abstaining from evil deeds, Samakamanta arises but Samavaka and Sama-ajiva cannot arise. And if abstaining from wrong livelihood, Sama-ajiva arises but Samavaka and Samakamanta cannot. They arise separately in Kamavakara wholesome consciousness. They arise in this type of consciousness because it refrains from committing evil thoughts, words, deeds, and livelihood, sometimes. When we pay respect to the Buddha, for example, Samavaka, Samakamanta and Sama-ajiva are not necessarily associated, right? Similarly, when you sit in meditation, in that moment Kamavakara wholesome consciousness arises, right? But it's not concerned with abstaining from evil speech, deeds, thoughts or wrong livelihood. In that moment, Virati cannot arise. So, in this example, wholesome consciousness arises, but not abstinence. When we abstain from evil speech, Samavaka arises. When we abstain from evil deeds, Samakamanta arises. And when we abstain from wrong livelihood, Sama-ajiva arises. If someone says to you, selling alcohol is a good business in a city like Las Vegas. You should open a bar, you might think, I don't think I should do that. That's not good livelihood. In that moment, your mind is wholesome consciousness with knowledge. Sama-ajiva arises too. Similarly, if someone says to you, you shouldn't let him get away with saying that. You should yell at him and curse him out, you might think, I don't want to do that. In that moment, your mind is wholesome consciousness. And Samavaka also arises, but Samakamanta and Sama-ajiva cannot arise. We've been talking about Kamavakara wholesome consciousness. However, when these factors arise in supramundane consciousness, they arise together. How does this work? When they arise in the 8 or 40 types of supramundane consciousness for the first time, they are crushed. That is, evil speech, evil deeds and wrong livelihood are eradicated on the occasion of Magga Sata. As such, it's not necessary to crush them again. They are gone. So, when we gain enlightenment, Magga Sata and Virati arise simultaneously, all at once. And whenever Magga Sata or Phala Sata arise, Virati also arises all the time, always. In contrast, in Kamavikara wholesome consciousness, they arise separately and occasionally. To summarize, Virati arise separately and occasionally in Kamavikara wholesome consciousness. And they arise all at once and always in supramundane consciousness. When Magga Sata and Phala Sata arise, Virati always arise too. Even though we know that Virati arise in Kamavikara wholesome consciousness and supramundane consciousness, we should understand how they differ in the regard I just explained. V. Karuna v. Mudita. These are the apamanya, compassion and appreciative joy, respectively. These two mental factors arise separately and occasionally. When apamanya arise, they are associated with the 28 types of consciousness, the 8 types of Kamavikara wholesome consciousness, the 8 types of Kamavikara functional consciousness, and the 12 types of Rupavikara consciousness, we've already studied. Why do they arise separately? Because their objects differ. As its object, Karuna embraces sorrow-afflicted beings. And as its object, Mudita embraces prosperous beings. See, the objects are different. When you want to help someone who is suffering, what type of apamanya arises? Karuna. And when you meet someone who is wealthy, clever, or happy, you may feel happy for them. This is mudita. When mudita arises, karuna cannot arise. They cannot arise at the same time. Also, these two mental factors arise occasionally, just sometimes. When you feel pity for a pain-afflicted being, at that moment karuna arises. When you sit in meditation, wholesome consciousness arises, but there might not be karuna, right? It depends on the object of your meditation. So, when wholesome consciousness arises, will there always be karuna? No, it's the same for mudita. If you see a beggar, feel pity, and give him $1, what type of consciousness arises in that moment? Wholesome consciousness. Is there mudita too? No, see? It depends on the object. X. Mana. This is conceit. It is also an unfixed adjunct. It arises occasionally. It arises in the 4 types of Ditthagata Vipayuta unwholesome consciousness, right? This is unwholesome consciousness without wrong view. When unwholesome consciousness without wrong view arises, mana will occasionally arise, but sometimes it won't. If, for example, you think, I'm the most clever, the best, or the richest, etc., at that moment mana arises. If you don't feel that way, then mana does not arise. It depends on what we think. X. Thina Shi. Mitta. These are sloth and torpor. They arise occasionally, and always together. They arise in prompted consciousness, right? The 5 types of Sasankarika consciousness. When one of these 5 arises, if these mental factors arise with it, the 2 factors will arise together. But they only arise occasionally. Sometimes, Sasankarika consciousness arises but Thina Mitta do not. And when we have sickness of the mind, in that moment, we feel sleepy, Thina Mitta arise together. Otherwise, they do not arise at all. So, these are the 11 kinds of Anyata yogi, or unfixed adjunct, mental factors. The remaining 41 kinds of Cetasika are called Niyata yogi Cetasika, or fixed adjuncts. We've been talking about the Sampayoga method. Now, we go to the Sangaha method. Sangaha method. The Sangaha method is concerned with the various types of consciousness and how many mental factors enter into combinations with them. Whereas with the Sampayoga method we looked at where the mental factors arise and in how many different types of consciousness. With the Sangaha method we are looking at how many mental factors enter into combinations with the various types of consciousness. Let's start with the 5 types of Asankarika, unprompted, consciousness. The first is Somanasa Sahagata Ditthagata Sampayuta Asankarika, or with pleasure, with wrong view, unprompted. 19 mental factors enter into combination with this type of consciousness. What are they? If unwholesome consciousness, such as this type of consciousness, arises, we don't need to look at beautiful mental factors. Instead, we can just look at the 13 miscellaneous mental factors and the 14 unwholesome mental factors. We need only look at these 27 mental factors. The 13 miscellaneous mental factors consist of the 7 universal mental factors and the 6 occasional mental factors. Plus, we have the 4 unwholesome universal mental factors. Together, that's 17 mental factors. Also, Lobha associates with Lobha Mula Sata all the time, and, as this type of consciousness is associated with wrong belief, we also have Ditthi. In total, that's 19 kinds of mental factors. Just try to remember this one. That's enough to help you with the rest. Now, we go to the second type of unprompted consciousness. Somanasa Sahagata Dithagata Vipayuta Asankarika, or with pleasure, without wrong view, unprompted. Again, we have 19 mental factors. But although the number is the same, they differ slightly. Instead of ditthi, we now have conceit, mana. Those two mental factors cannot arise together. The third unprompted consciousness is upeka sahagata dithagata sampayuta asankarika, or with indifferent feeling, with wrong view, unprompted. How many mental factors arise? 18. Among the 13 miscellaneous mental factors, we cannot have piti, which is somanasa. Instead, we have indifferent feeling. So, we have 12 of the 13 miscellaneous mental factors, the 4 unwholesome universal mental factors, plus lobha and ditthi. That's 18 mental factors. The fourth unprompted consciousness is upeka sahagata dithagata vipayuta asankarika, or with indifferent feeling, without wrong view, unprompted. How many mental states enter into combination with this type of consciousness? 18. It's the same 18 as the previous type of consciousness we just talked about, except now it is together with lobha and mana, as this is dithagata vipayuta. And the fifth unprompted consciousness is part of dosa mula sata, right? It is domanasa sahagata patiya sampayuta asankarika, or with displeasure, with ill will, unprompted. How many mental factors? 20. Excluding piti, we have the 12 miscellaneous mental factors. And we have the 4 kinds of unwholesome universal mental factors, plus, dosa, isa, makariya, and kukuka, which arise in dosa mula sata. That's 20, right? Isa, makariya, and kukuka arise separately, since they are aniyata yogi, unfixed adjuncts. Their objects are different. Now that we know the types of unprompted consciousness, we go to sasankarika, or prompted consciousness. The first prompted consciousness is somanasa sahagata dithagata sampayuta sasankarika, or with pleasure, with wrong view, prompted. How many mental states enter into combination here? 21. It's the same 19 mental factors as the first type of unprompted consciousness, then we add thina mitta. So, for every prompted consciousness, just add sloth and torpor to the number of mental factors associated with its unprompted counterpart. Now, we're done with the 8 types of lobha mula sata and the 2 types of dosa mula sata, the 5 unprompted and the 5 prompted types of consciousness. Next, we go to the 2 types of moha mula sata, upeka sahagata visakicha sampayuta, with indifferent feeling, with doubt, and upeka sahagata udacha sampayuta, with indifferent feeling, with restlessness. The first one is accompanied by doubt, right? How many mental factors enter into combination with it? 15. The number is the same for the second one too, but individually they are different. So, what are the 15 mental factors? From the 13 kinds of miscellaneous mental factors, we deduct adhimokkha, decision, chanda, desire, and piti. That leaves 10 miscellaneous mental factors. Then we add the 4 unwholesome universal mental factors and doubt. In total, that's 15 mental factors that enter into combination with doubt consciousness. The last moha mula sata is udacha. Here, we exclude piti and chanda, which leaves 11 miscellaneous mental factors. When we add the 4 unwholesome universal mental factors, we get 15 mental factors. We've now finished unwholesome consciousness. Let's go to the 18 types of ahatuka, rootless, consciousness. First, we have the 10 types of consciousness that are collectively called dvipankavinyana. How many mental factors enter into combination with these 10 types of consciousness? 7. What are they? The 7 universal mental factors. Easy. Now, we go to the 2 types of sampadachana, receiving consciousness, and the 1 type of panyukadvaravajana, 5 sense door adverting consciousness. These 3 types of consciousness are termed mind element, manadhatu. Mano is mind and dhatu is element. How many mental factors enter into combination here? 10. What are they? They are the 7 universal mental factors, plus vitakka, initial application, vikara, sustained application, and adhimokkha. Next, we have the 3 types of santirana, investigating consciousness. 2 types are accompanied by upeka, and 1 is accompanied by somanasa. The 2 types accompanied by indifferent feeling have 10 mental factors that enter into combination. They include the 7 universal mental factors, plus vitakka, vikara, and adhimokkha. The 3rd type, which is accompanied by pleasure, has 11 mental factors. They are the 7 universal mental factors, plus vitakka, vikara, adhimokkha, and piti. Next, we go to manadvaravajana, mind door adverting consciousness. How many mental factors? 11. They are the 7 universal mental factors, plus vitakka, vikara, adhimokkha, and viriya, effort. The last one is hasatuppada, or smile-producing consciousness. How many mental factors enter into combination here? 12. They include the 7 universal mental factors, and except for desire, chanda, all of the occasional mental factors. That totals 12 mental factors. Now that we're finished with ahatuka, let's go to kamavikara sobhana. If you get the first one here too, you'll find that the rest are very easy. Amongst sense sphere beautiful consciousness, the first pair is Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Asankarika and Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Sasankarika. How many mental factors enter into combination with these two types of consciousness? 38. These 38 are very easy. They include the 13 miscellaneous mental factors and the 25 sobhana, beautiful, mental factors. That's 38 mental factors. You don't have to look at unwholesome mental factors at all. As we already discussed, Virati and Apamanya associate with these types of consciousness separately and occasionally. The second pair is Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Asankarika and Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Sasankarika. How many mental factors? 37. They have the same 38 as the pair we just talked about, minus wisdom, because they are Jnana Vipayutta. The third pair is Upeka Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Asankarika and Upeka Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Sasankarika. These two are accompanied by knowledge, but also upeka. How many mental factors? 37. Except for piti, they have all of the miscellaneous mental factors and the 25 beautiful mental factors. How about the fourth pair? They are upeka Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Asankarika and upeka Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Sasankarika. Because they are upeka, piti cannot associate. And because they are without knowledge, there is no wisdom. So that's 36 mental factors for this pair. Let's look at Kamavikara Sobhana Vipaka Sata, or sense sphere beautiful resultant consciousness. The first pair is Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Asankarika and Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Sasankarika. A total of 33 mental factors enter into combination here. These include the 13 miscellaneous mental factors and the 19 kinds of beautiful universal mental factors. That's 32 mental factors. These two types of consciousness are associated with wisdom, so that's a total of 33 mental factors. There is no Virati and no Apamanya. The second pair is Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Asankarika and Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Sasankarika. They have no wisdom, so they have 32 kinds of mental factors. The third pair is Upeka Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Asankarika and Upeka Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Sasankarika. They have no piti, so they also have 32 kinds of mental factors. The fourth pair is Upeka Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Asankarika and Upeka Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Sasankarika. They have no wisdom and no piti, so they have 31 kinds of mental factors. Now, Kamavikara Sobhana Kiriya Sata, or sense sphere beautiful functional consciousness. The first pair is Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Asankarika and Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Sasankarika. They have 35 mental factors that enter into combination. They include the 13 miscellaneous mental factors and the 19 beautiful universal mental factors. That's 32 mental factors. They also have the 2 apamanya, as well as wisdom. Another way of saying it is that, excluding the 3 abstinences, they have 22 beautiful mental factors and 13 miscellaneous mental factors. Altogether, that's 35 mental factors. The second pair is Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Asankarika and Somanasa Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Sasankarika. They have no wisdom, so they have 34 mental factors. The third pair is Upeka Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Asankarika and Upeka Sahagata Jnana Sampayutta Sasankarika. They have no piti, so they also have 34 mental factors. The last pair is Upeka Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Asankarika and Upeka Sahagata Jnana Vipayutta Sasankarika. They have no piti and no wisdom, so they have 33 mental factors. Now, let's go to sublime consciousness. The 3 types of first jhana consciousness, wholesome, resultant, and functional, have 35 mental factors. This is the 13 miscellaneous mental factors, and excluding the 3 abstinences, 22 beautiful mental factors. The 3 types of second jhana consciousness have no vitakka, so they have 34 mental factors. The 3 types of third jhana consciousness have no vitakka and no vikara, so they have 33 mental factors. The 3 types of fourth jhana consciousness have no vitakka, no vikara, and no pity. That's 32 kinds of mental factors. Fifth jhana also includes arupa consciousness, so that's 15 types of consciousness. How many mental factors? 33. There's no virati and no apamanya. So, they have the 13 miscellaneous mental factors, the 19 beautiful universal mental factors, and wisdom. Now, lokutra, or supramundane consciousness. How many mental factors for the 8 types of first lokutra jhana? 36. This includes the 13 miscellaneous mental factors, and excluding apamanya, the remaining 23 beautiful mental factors. That's 36 mental factors. How about the 8 types of second lokutra jhana? No vitakka, right? So it becomes 35 mental factors. For the 8 types of third lokutra jhana, there's also no vikara, so it becomes 34 mental factors. For the 8 types of fourth lokutra jhana, there's also no pity, so it becomes 33 mental factors. And the fifth lokutra jhana also has 3 mental factors. Now we've learned about the various types of consciousness and how the various mental factors associate with them. Let's take a few minutes to review some of what we've learned. What consciousness combines with the most mental factors? Kamavikara, wholesome consciousness. 38, right? That's why we call it Mahakusala, or great wholesome consciousness. We should understand, though, that there are not always 38 mental factors. This is because virati and apamanya arise separately. So, in terms of how many mental factors always arise in Kamavikara wholesome consciousness, the answer is 33 mental factors. It's 38 minus virati and apamanya. Whenever this wholesome consciousness arises, these 33 mental factors arise. If one of the virati or apamanya arises, then there are 34 mental factors. So, at least 33, sometimes 34, and a total of 38 mental factors for Mahakusala. What consciousness always combines with the most mental factors? The first lokutra jhana, it always combines with 36 mental factors. What consciousness always combines with the least amount of mental factors? The 10 types of Dvipankavinyana. They always and only combine with the 7 universal mental factors. What mental factors associate with all types of consciousness? The 7 universal mental factors. What mental factor associates with the fewest types of consciousness? Visakicha, which associates with just one. Okay, we've finished talking about Sata and Cetasika. Next week, we'll start the next section. Let's stop here for today. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.